Russia has been marking the 78th anniversary of its victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. Known as Victory Day, this year's commemorations come at a time when Russia itself is deeply entrenched in its invasion of Ukraine. An apparent drone attack on the Kremlin last week has only added to the nervousness in Moscow.
Victory Day in Moscow is always a full-on display of choreography, pageantry, and prowess. But this year, more than others, Vladimir Putin wants it to act as a national call to arms, as he again raged against the West, claiming that Russia was the victim.
Today, civilization is once again at a decisive turning point. A real war has been unleashed against our motherland. We have rebuffed international terrorism, and we will protect residents of the Donbass, and we will ensure our security.
Apparently, this is the scaled-back version. An effort to manage heightened security concerns amid a number of attacks on Russian soil. Putin appealed to the patriotism of his soldiers fighting in Ukraine, some of them watching on.
The security of our country rests on you today. The future of our statehood and our people depend on you. You are fulfilling your military duty with honor. You are fighting for Russia.
But beneath the veneer of grandeur, Russia's bungled invasion of Ukraine has left many wondering if parades like this are a weapons fest, papering over the cracks in its armed forces. Putin, for his part, seemed pleased and ended with a rallying call.
For Russia, for our valiant armed forces, for victory, hurrah!
Meanwhile, Moscow's parade did not go down well in Kyiv. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky called it an act of propaganda, chiefly aimed at the Russian people. He said the Kremlin was celebrating victory in Ukraine when in actual fact Moscow's war was faltering.
In my opinion, the Russian Federation, their military and political leadership needs something to sell to their people, because they have no victories to boast of. Their society is bloodthirsty. We can see how they support certain radical actions. They are always happy about the number of deaths. They could not sell Bakhmut because they could not capture it. That was their last really important operation, and they wanted to do it by May 9th. Unfortunately, that town does not exist anymore. Everything has been destroyed.
Now let's bring in DW Moscow Bureau Chief Yuri Reshetu, who is covering developments from Riga after DW was banned from reporting in Russia. Now, Yuri, what did you think of Putin's speech there? Any surprises?
Well, it was a speech in which Putin emphasized Russia's strength, as expected, with great pathos. And he took the opportunity, of course, to do what Russian state propaganda has been doing for a year already, namely to present the war in Ukraine as a legitimate fight against the Nazis, just like the fight of the Soviet people against Nazi Germany 78 years ago. Right from the start, Putin condemned the so-called international terrorism and accused other countries of starting the war in Ukraine. So he claimed exactly the opposite of what happened a year ago. He spoke of the alleged crimes of the neo-Nazis around the world who allegedly wanted nothing other than the end of Russia. Western elites would split society, sow Russophobia, aggressive nationalism and destroy traditional values. The conclusion of his speech is the Russians want nothing but peace and the evil Nazis worldwide want to destroy Russia.
The rhetoric, as expected, if you will. So you were a correspondent in Moscow for 7 years, Yuri. You've reported directly from those parades at the Red Square. What's different about the parade this year?
Well, the Victory Day, Gerhard, has changed over the decades. After the World War II, it wasn't a big celebration at all. It was a silent day of remembrance. People simply remembered at home the victims. Then parades were introduced in the 60s, and the quiet day turned out into a loud day. And since then, the parades hardly differ from year to year. The whole center in Moscow is isolated, police is everywhere, and normal people have no access not only to Red Square, but to the center. So it's just a big and very expensive production for television. This year there was no military aviation, however, no jets flew over Red Square, although the weather was very good, probably for security reasons, because just a few days ago 2 drones exploded over the Kremlin. On Red Square there were 7 presidents among the foreign guests, all from, let's say, Russia-friendly neighboring post-Soviet countries.
You mentioned that it used to be a quiet day where families celebrated at home or remembered at home. What about ordinary people today? How are families celebrating this day after a year of Russia's war against Ukraine?
Well, for the first time, military parades were cancelled in 24 Russian cities, even though millions of Russian families still remember this day, Gerhard. My mother is almost 84 years in Russia, and this is a very emotional day for her. She was a small child in Siberia, and she remembers every detail of May 9, 1945. Consequently, people in Russia send messages, congratulate each other. And it's interesting that, on the other hand, here in Latvia, where I'm right now, in Riga, and also in Lithuania and Estonia, this day has a completely different meaning. For people in the Baltic countries, this was the start of what they call the Soviet occupation. And after the demolition of the large war memorials here in Riga, there is no memory at all on the Victory Day, at least on the streets. But back to Russia, I also know people, young people, who no longer celebrate this day. They are saying because of Russia's war in Ukraine. They say, sorry, grandfather, I just can't do it anymore.
Yuri Risheto there reporting. Thank you very much, Yuri. Let's cross over to Kyiv, where my colleague, our correspondent, Matthias Böllinger, is standing by. Matthias, we've heard Zelensky there, the president. How is the Ukrainian public, though, responding to the rhetoric coming out of Moscow?
Throughout this war, Putin's words have somehow lost a lot of their meaning. If before the war people were trying to figure out what he really plans to do, when he gave speeches, they're more or less seen now as banter without consequences. There has been a lot of anger at Putin, painting himself as the victim of this war when he is the aggressor in the eyes of the Ukrainian people. But there's also been a lot of mockery on that, calling him ridiculous, calling him pathetic. There's also been some glee, some schadenfreude at this parade that was the shortest in history, as people here have remarked, like the secretary of the Defense Council here, who has said that Russia's leaders couldn't wait to get back to their bunkers. That's why it was so short. So overall, people do not really take Putin's words, at least, seriously here.
Now, Zelensky met with Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission president, today. That's not a coincidence, is it?
It is not. Ukraine has started celebrating the end of World War II on the 8th of May, like the Western allies a few years ago, and is moving away from the Soviet narrative of the Great Patriotic War, as it was called at the times, and as it is called in Russia, calling it the World War II, and bringing its perception more in line with what is the perception in Europe. And the 9th of May, coincidentally, in Europe is the day of the founding of the European Union, or rather its predecessor. And that's why today Zelensky has called this day the Day of European Unity, and that is why Ursula von der Leyen came here.
Now, Matthias, what's the latest you can tell us from the battlefield, especially from the besieged town of Bakhmut?
Yeah, conflicting information again. There was another rant today by Prigozhin, who is controlling the Wagner militia that is there, that is the main active force there from the Russian side, saying that they have lost 3 square kilometers, which is quite a lot, to the Ukrainian army, blaming the Russian army for letting down the Wagner forces. Of course, all this is followed here closely, and we'll really find out what has happened there, what the situation is there, probably within the next few days when some geolocated footage appears.
Matthias Böllinger there reporting from Kyiv. Thank you very, very much, Matthias.